All right, welcome everybody. It is such an honor to have all of you here, and it's an honor to be able to be the MC tonight. Oh. It is my pleasure to introduce, and she has done a great job pulling all this together, Tricia King Mims, Executive Director. Yeah, you can clap. She deserves this.
Thanks, Chad. Thank you, Chad, and thank you all so much for being here. National Park Partners grows Chattanooga's national park legacy by preserving, promoting, and enhancing the historic landscapes and significant stories of Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park, including Moccasin National Archeological District. I believe we all know the impetus of this public forum being held, but for the record, we are categorically opposed to the new construction of non-conforming use facilities within the National Historic Landmark boundary on Moccasin Bend. We do not accept the proposal by the state of Tennessee to rebuild its 1961 mental hospital on its current campus adjacent to the National Archeological District. To be clear, we also fully support the investment in a new modern mental health facility that better serves the needs of the 52 East Tennessee counties that utilize the current hospital. Tonight, we will share why we believe a different land use decision needs to be made on Moccasin Bend, one that respects the past while investing in the present and preserving for the future. We stand on and are surrounded by indigenous land of profound cultural importance, sustaining 12,000 years of human habitation. From the earliest Paleo-Indians to the powerful chiefdoms contacted by Spanish explorers to the forced removal of the Cherokee in 1838, we honor the ancestors who lived and died, laughed and cried, brought forth life while giving birth, and buried loved ones in the earth. We advocate for the preservation and interpretation of Moccasin Bend's indigenous heritage by and for all people, especially the living descendants of these proud and deep histories. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Hamilton County Mayor Weston Wamp.
Thanks. I didn't know whether we were doing a Q&A or what we're doing. I didn't know if I was going before Zach Wamp or after Zach Wamp. It's better on this subject to go before him. It's actually always encouraging, no matter where I go in our community, to see a room full of people who care. And on this subject, it's one that's very near and dear to our family. Not a lot of people grow up where the kitchen table talk is about non-conforming uses. but ours was. Ours was. I want to introduce to you at the back of the room, Matt Foles is the county's parks director and came to us by way of the National Park System. And as we think about the future of our shared spaces in this community, he often talks about pursuing a vision that would make these places nationally known and locally loved. And deeply embedded in the story of this community is that we take care of those stories and the legacy that we've been given. And we're on the side of a mountain where most of it was never open for development because Mr. Ox insisted that it wouldn't be, and he and Mr. Chambliss teamed up some 150 years ago to acquire the point of the mountain. He was frustrated. Many of you are historians, and you may correct details I get wrong, but the essence of the story is true, and it says a lot about who our community has always been. He didn't like the commercialization, the cheap commercialization of parts of the top of Lookout Mountain, and so he acquired that land to be ours. First, to be a point of pride long before interstates brought a whole lot of tourists to our community. First is to belong to us. And he went further. I get frustrated sometimes because we mistake philanthropy and even conservation for people just looking to the government to fix everything, when in fact it was almost always private leadership and the grandiosity really of philanthropy that changed our community in a fundamental way. And so it wasn't good enough that he acquired what we now call Point Park and gave it back to the public, but he insisted that there needed to be a modern mountain road coming up the side of it. And so he fronted the money to the county of Hamilton to build what we now call Ox Highway. And I think the story that's evolved over millennia at Moccasin Bend, certainly one that's been told and retold in the Wamp family, it's sort of come to this moment decide, are we going to caretake that land okay? Are we going to do the easiest thing or the most affordable option or the one that might ruffle the fewest feathers? Or are we going to rise to the occasion like so many people in our community and in this region have before? Are we going to cherish it like what many envision could be quite literally a Central Park-sized piece of land right in the middle of one of America's great communities? And so it's a subject that I inherited, the one of a mental health hospital and where it might go. I think in hindsight, like a lot of things, probably the stadium is in this category. They would have been better, had Mayor Kelley and I teamed up on them. Some of these things got initiated a few months before I came into office. And I work extremely closely with our delegation. And so part of what I would encourage this room that I think shares a legacy that a lot of people at this table have carried for a while. It's one that my father certainly cherished in his time in office. I don't think there's a single thing he did in 16 years. He can speak to this, but from the vantage point of a son, I'm not sure that there's much he was a part of that he's more proud of than being a part of having this land set aside. I think what's really key in the politics of all this is that we humbly go to those in state government. This is on land that the city and county, and this is an important part of the history, the city and county gave to the state for a mental health hospital. And then we allow golf to be played there and a firing range, but hopefully not forever. That we go to them with what is a multifaceted and immensely complex challenge, and we charge them to pursue excellence in the way that, frankly, Chairwoman Hazelwood and Chairman Watson and others in our delegation do on a whole number of different fronts. And that's where I do wish that we could go back 2 years in time and that the city and county could have been unified as we once were and handed that land over to say now that there's a very clear path to a national park that would be so iconic right where it sits. It would have regional impact. But we can't go back in time and perfect the case that was made. But I spoke to Commissioner Williams 2 days ago, and we had a good conversation. And she was very transparent about why her and her department are not represented here. And I believe, and I've asked her to be committed to a transparent process from this point forward. And I was really encouraged by part of what she reported, and that is that the Phase 1 archaeological analysis, the experts can speak to it, may not be thorough enough, but it is going to take more time than they thought, which feels to me like a good sign. And when that is done, she promised to include all stakeholders coming back together to have this conversation again. And she spoke about the sign-off that will ultimately be required by Governor Lee, who is, as I know him, a rural Tennessean with a heart for conservation, and I'd say that's a big part of what our family's been about for a long time. Is that conservatives actually can be quite good conservationists if we be bold enough to step forward. So I would ask all of you to join me in a very diplomatic type of advocacy, both to the governor of our state and to our delegation, and honored to be with you tonight.
Mayor, thank you very much. Representing City Mayor Tim Kelley is Scott Martin, Administrator of the Chattanooga Parks and Outdoor Department, who will give a few opening remarks. Other elected officials include maybe former, but they look great, but former Congressman Zach Wamp, former City Councilwoman Sally Robinson, great to see you. They are joined by longtime friends of Moccasin Bend and now Moccasin Park Partners Board members Jay Mills. Thank you for everything you have done. Moccasin Bend Task Force Chair Rick Montague. Rick, it's great to see you as well. Representing the National Park Service, Superintendent Brad Bennett, and Park Historian, this guy is great, Jim Ogden. I'd also like to recognize, I believe he is here, County Commissioner Joe Graham. They said, they're good to have you, sir. And former City Councilman and Chattanooga Mayor Ron Littlefield. It's just a pleasure to see you too. So, Scott Martin, Administrator of Chattanooga Parks and Outdoors.
Okay.
Oh, there you are. Oh my gosh, you got great hair, buddy. Oh my God. Good to see you.
You all hear me? I just got my voice back this morning, so apologies if it breaks. And I'm between wamps, so that's a little terrifying, but I shall do the best I can. The mayor hit a very important point, and I'm going to paraphrase him. Communities are never built on spreadsheets. They're built on story. Families are never built on a spreadsheet. You don't decide the spreadsheet says, let's have a kid. You do it because of story and something that's more important. And the mayor hit all the big points. The county and the city are absolutely linked at the hip to move the range. They're absolutely linked at the hip to honor this site and to find a solution that's going to work. I want to share a story with you and then shut up that you may have heard of. We're chasing this national park city idea for Chattanooga. You may have heard a little bit about. And I had the great privilege to present our case in Australia back in November. Now, the first national park city in the U.S., you would have assumed maybe St. Augustine, Savannah, Charleston, Williamsburg. Well, Chattanooga was selected. And Chattanooga was selected because of the story, in large part, that's right around the bend here. So I'm in Australia making the pitch, and it's us, Rotterdam, Utrecht, Glasgow. And all the questions from these Aussies are coming back to me because the American South, of course, is this incredibly fascinating place to people in the globe because they never come here when they come to the U.S. They do Disney, Chicago, New York. They're like terrified. I may or may not have left them with the idea that Dolly Parton and Usher live here and hang out with us every day. So let's just roll with this. But at the end of my talk, a hand goes up in the back of the room about 2,000 people. And it's an Aboriginal elder. And if you know anything about the Aboriginal story in Australia recently, there was a vote this past fall, their spring, to give them representation in their parliament, to give them essentially personhood status. It was thought to be a slam dunk, and it failed. So the Aboriginal nation is having a moment of reflection. Are we even welcome in our land that we've inhabited for 40,000, 50,000, 60,000 years? So I say that to layer when an Aboriginal elder gets up to ask you a question, and you're a white face 5,000 miles from home talking funny, you pay attention. And he says to me, he goes, great story. He goes, can I ask you a question about where you live? I said, yes, sir. He says, my people are rereading the work of Dr. King. We're looking for hope. And we were rereading the speech from the Lincoln Memorial. And mate, when he says, Lookout Mountain, and this finger points at me, and it's a finger that's seen more life than I can imagine. He says, is that you? White face, big room, scary. What do you say? Yes, sir, that is me. He says, well, you have to be a national park city. We need you to be hope. We need Chattanooga to give us hope and tell us the story is not done. That's what this is about. These are moral moves, y'all. This ain't anywhere USA. Bigger than a spreadsheet. And I can say this. I got permission to say it. A park in that location will do more economically, morally, and in terms of shaping our trajectory than any mental hospital will ever do. Thank you all for having us.
And we are so glad you're in our community, Scott. Thank you very much. Next, we'll be treated to an original poem inspired by visits to the Moccasin Bend by local poetess Erica Dion Roberts.
The vein of the big tree gives life like an artery, just as its underground arms reach to save. Ocular proof of the time-defying beauty that paints, communicating its message boldly with light. It's silent. The foliage signals the change. Autumn's paintbrush has a past. Finding movement in their native descent, the leaves leave, creating a soft carpet of colors that feed the hungry soil. It's sacred, a congregation of timbers, sending hallelujahs to the heavens, new journey intertwined with roots from the stewards, reminding us of the protected connection, life underfoot. It's secluded. The story misunderstood. The importance was ignored, held over dirt, healing from the earth, missing the mark. The legacy is what's hurt. Heart of the home is buried deep above the world moves about, sleep walking through headlines. Motives motivating meaningless moments. Murky are those waters and vast are those empty, empty promises. The alarm clock of tainted privilege screams loudly, disturbing progress. It's spiritual. Interpretation from afar. Your Highness, mountains glowing like crowns. The color green was born here. Organic, altar honoring the ancestors beneath the tapestry. For texture is the pathway of the overlooked past that connects us to a silent love. Violated memories made a victim of the land, a symphony of emotions moving from the branches down, down, down through the trunks, vibrating the ground into a relentless rhythm. It's precious percussion, drumming through time. Its presence is full and felt internally. We were led here by them. The truth is here, hanging from the trunk's canopy. Love is here, moving through the air. We hear it now, so we must honor it now.
Erica, thank you very much. Now it's an honor to welcome Jay Mills and Jim Ogden for an archaeological and a historical overview.
Moccasin Bend is an incredible place. Moccasin Bend is an incredible place because of it's a juncture where the main region's river, the Great Valley drains from Virginia, much of North Carolina mountains, all East Tennessee, and this is where it turns and bends through the Cumberland Mountains. And there are other breaks here, and then you have the point of Lookout Mountain. These form a very important juncture for the railroads. It's a path of least resistance. For the generals in the Civil War, it was the strategic supply lines and the route that they needed to prosecute the war. They needed to control this juncture. In prehistory, you have the Cherokee, when they made their last stand, losing treaty after treaty. This is the point they chose to control, Dragon Canoe. And no one passed through here for the entire duration of the Revolutionary War. Going back in prehistory, the hunter-gatherers, this was a spot you had to know where to get through the mountains, where to go for your seasonal movements. Through over 10,000 years, that was a critical path. Then when the powerful chieftains were along the river, this was an area that if you controlled this, you had power, you had politics, you had control of the economy. Moccasin Bend is not just, it's also because of you notice that the river here reaches, when it floods, it has nowhere to go in the Tennessee Gorge. There's no floodplain. So the water piles up out here, and you get a lot more deposition of silt. As a result, you have higher levees here, higher riverbanks. And it's not just one riverbank, but two. You'll notice the one riverbank here, the modern one, and that is the ancient one during the last ice age. A higher river. It was a wetter time. The river was wilder, ran harder. The modern floodplain was cut away at that time. Most of the floodplain, it actually was doing more cutting back then, and it's rare that you have this older floodplain this well preserved along here. And that's where you might find the very oldest sites of the first peoples in the continent. Here you can see the flood of 73, which some of us experienced. You can notice how here you have, normally it's just a linear ridge, a micro ridge. It has a path you can travel and sleep on, but it's on a bend like this. You have the river it flows this way, and when it has time to dump more silt and create a broad floodplain where you could have large numbers of people. These are the sites where you could find large settlements, and that's what we had here. And then right here is the heel of the bend of the ancient floodplain. That was the old riverbank, and right here, where the Weston building, where they proposed rebuilding on that smaller footprint than the large hospital, that would have been the heel at that time, where that would have been the broad levee. Both of these floodplains have this overbank. After the floods, that would be where a lot of fish and other wildlife were. That was very important as well. Geological map showing the geology of those overbanks. We're talking about the Paleo-Indian period is the first. Those first 3,000 years, from 13,000 to 10,000 years ago. And the oldest thing we found on the bend is a Paleolithic point from that time period, a Beaver Lake Point. And that was found in this area right here, right on the edge of that old terrace, that old riverbank. There's a surface find. Very little archaeology has been done on the old riverbed. At that type of point at other sites have been found with the megafauna of that time period that people would hunt, where they would kill mastodon, mammoth, bison. But they were disappearing along with the changing of the climate, the megafauna. The next time period, the climate was changing. About 10,000 years ago, all the megafauna went extinct. And the Archaic period is a long time period. And when people were settling into the environment, still living along the old floodplain, starting to move into the new forming floodplain, and they aggregated in the summer times. In the winter time, they went into the mountains, and so that they could support themselves through the lean months. The archaeological sites around the bend are mostly on the perimeter, and we know about those because they are threatened, and that's when the archaeology are damaged, and that's when the archaeologists have been getting involved. But the old levee, there's only one spot on that levee here where a pipeline was crossing that we know anything. The hospital has not wanted us when we've been out there to get near the hospitals, and so we've never excavated there. That one pipeline. This is looking out over the modern floodplain, and this is up on the old floodplain. Up here on the old floodplain, layers of hearths that date 10,000 all the way down to 3,000 years old, and points that are diagnostic of each time period in between. So for about 7,000 years, people were frequenting that, and the woodland was also materials found there as well. So essentially, at all times, the older levee, where the hospital was proposed, had materials on it, but yet we have not done the archaeology there. The heel of the bend, when they made the highway, was cut off to relocate the channel. Otherwise, the river would have wreaked havoc, upstream and down. They slurried the material that they dredged into that back channel where the Paleo and Archaic Indians would have been fishing. Archaeology was done in front of the dredge, and what they found was mostly woodland period from 3,000 to 1,000 years ago. This is the pedestals from the hearths. As they excavated down, they would find a hearth, excavate the contents, date it, understand it, and then leave it as a pedestal. So you actually have, you can see the going back in time as these get shorter. And there is Archaic, woodland, and Mississippian all throughout the whole floodplains that they were excavating. The woodland period was when people started doing agriculture, started using ceramics, were settling permanently in the villages, that they were building all around the perimeter of Moccasin Bend. And on that old levee, that's where they built around the main hospital campus. You can see on the hill there, a small tumuli, a mound, burial mound. They also were trading goods all the way from Michigan and the coast of ceremonial goods, all the way from the coast all the way up to Michigan. That was the woodland period. In the succeeding Mississippian period, we have large palisaded villages based on agriculture, corn, beans, squash, and you notice that the mounds here around the hospital, and there's one purported to be up this way that was supposedly plowed to nothing. And this is when the Spanish contact was made. And this is a phenomenal site. Again, it's palisaded against the rain. These are powerful chiefdoms, and they have standing armies. This is a house. You can see the largest thing in the middle is the fireplace, just off center, so the rain coming down the center of the open roof doesn't put it out. And then the 4 posts, and then the curtain wall around. That's a 5 meter by 5 meter square. Pretty large place. That's a bit smaller, a good bit smaller the way that's been drawn, but shows the construction. And ours were a little different than this. This is from actually Senator Frist's property in Franklin. That he was one who's also for the legislation that was passed. This right here is what the walls were like at Moccasin Bend, wattle and daubed. All the houses were burned after the Spanish came through, and the diseases caused mortality, morbidity, the economy collapsed, and throughout the Tennessee Valley, people were refugees. They went down into northern Alabama, the Coosa and the Tallapoosa drainages, and became known as the Upper Creek. But this is a wattle and daub with mud on it, is what we found at the site. Phenomenal amounts of Spanish goods, both within the houses that have been excavated and in the hearsay from what the looters had found that were active in the 70s. That has now stopped. This is the sphere of influence. And it was the paramount chieftain was in Coosa, present-day Calhoun. Jim Langford's here, who knows a lot about this, about the sites down there. And then they fled down to the south. Who were these people? Years later, Swanton is a scholar who probably no one will know as much about the ethnography of in early history as Swanton. And he would say that these were probably the Coushatta or Indians that are now part of the Upper Creek. And these are a delegation in 1790 when the capital was in New York City. We're going for a treaty. And these are some portraits of them. I just wanted to put 5 portraits together, these 5 characters. Speaking of treaties, these were those Mississippian settlements of the Muskogean-speaking people, such as the Coushatta. And this is the clustering of them. You also head up the Little Tennessee River. That is where the Cherokee, there's about a 150-year period after this, that there was few people in this landscape. The Cherokee were moving into the Tennessee Valley. And when they moved into the Tennessee Valley, they started competing with whites who were there, or coming into there. And they gave up one treaty, a whole succession of treaties. At the Little River, Little Tennessee, excuse me, one guy said, there's a lot of people resisting stuff, but Dragon Canoe was the one who was the most well known because he actually said, right, I'm going to go down to the crossroads in Chattanooga, Moccasin Bend essentially, and I'm going to defend down there. And he took care of that by not allowing anyone to pass through the gorge of Tennessee. And with that, I'll give it to Jim. We're starting into the historic period.
With the Cherokee presence, but also the continued pressure on the Cherokee for forced cession, when they gave up armed resistance and attempted to negotiate for continued presence here, and also to adopt many of the new United States ways. a new class of Cherokee businessmen arise. And one, John Brown, will, amongst his businesses, operate a ferry across the Tennessee River here at the point that we know today as Brown's Ferry. This view looking from Moccasin Bend across the river to the notch in the range of hills through which the ferry passed. And it was one point of access to one of those doorways, gateways, those passageways that Jay started out talking about that ran through the area. And his businesses included servicing those who wanted to travel across or access that main route, the Federal Road that came up out of Georgia across the northern tip of Lookout Mountain and continued on into Middle Tennessee. And the route across Moccasin Bend and across the river at Brown's Ferry was essentially an access point to the river. Of course, the Brown structure here on Brown's Ferry Road. But it becomes an even more important point when, in 1819, the Cherokee were forced to cede the land north of the Tennessee River. And between 1819 and the 1830s, the Tennessee River was essentially the boundary line between the United States and the Cherokee Nation. Now, not everyone in the United States recognized it that way, but the United States government treated it with the Cherokee. And for those years, this was one of the crossing points to then be able to pass through the Cherokee Nation and to the United States points beyond. And Brown was allowed to claim a 640-acre reservation within the land ceded to the United States. And where did he put his 640-acre reservation? Right across the very neck of Moccasin Bend, right, including the Brown's Ferry site itself, again, to control, as we've heard Jay say, the access, the passageways through this area. And this 640-acre reservation can still be located today. Some of its boundary lines beyond the river itself are still in use today as boundary lines. The southern one here is the fence line between the wastewater treatment plant and the golf course. And if you patronize the liquor store on Manufacturers Road, there's a fence line right there that is part of this boundary line. Brown's reservation is still on the landscape, but he soon will sell this property, and others will operate the ferry until in the 1830s, and particularly in 1838, the Cherokee are forced westward. And there are parties of the Cherokee being removed that pass by, stop and supply, and even pass across the river here at Brown's Ferry, both forced removal parties and treaty party groups as well. And as this area then begins to grow, as the railroads that Jay talked about come in to expand the transportation, we also then get the nation dividing and the Civil War coming here to Chattanooga. Why? It's a doorway, gateway, passageway through the mountains. And Moccasin Bend here at the northern tip of Lookout Mountain will become a key point, particularly in the fall of 1863, when the Union Army, struggling to gain control of Chattanooga, defeated at Chickamauga, withdraws into the 1 square mile area in the bend of the Tennessee River surrounding Chattanooga, and fortifies themselves there. And the Confederates come up and besiege Chattanooga, occupying Lookout Mountain. But Confederate hold of Lookout Mountain will be tenuous because on the northern tip on the southern tip of Moccasin Bend, the Union Army will build earthwork fortifications on the tops of those hills, some of which are still there today, that sheltered artillery pieces that dominated the northern tip of Lookout Mountain and made Confederate control of that mountain very difficult and allowed the Union Army to prevent Confederate occupation of Lookout Valley to any extent. This image, the blue lines across, represent the major passageways by or over the northern tip of Lookout Mountain. And those Union cannon firing from those earthworks controlled all of that northern point of Lookout Mountain. And when the Union Army under Ulysses S. Grant in late October of 1863 went to open a new supply line into Chattanooga, there are fewer than 800 Confederate soldiers in Lookout Valley west of Lookout Mountain because a larger number cannot be supplied. And if they choose Brown's Ferry, the Union Army chooses Brown's Ferry as the principal point to seize. And in the pre-dawn hours of October the 27th, 1863, a flotilla of 1,400 Union soldiers and 50 pontoon boats and 2 flatboats descend the Tennessee River under the cover of darkness. And just as it begins to get light, they land along the banks of the Tennessee River right at Brown's Ferry and just upstream. In this image, you can see the ferry keeper's cabin there on the banks as Hazen's men land to seize Brown's Ferry from Private Robert B. Payne of the 15th Alabama, the one Confederate soldier on guard at Brown's Ferry. Not more because of that supply difficulty caused by those cannon. And there the Union Army will build a pontoon bridge across the Tennessee River, and with steamboats delivering supplies to Kelley's Ferry, there's a new supply line, the Cracker Line, into Chattanooga. And those guns on Moccasin Bend were located on the hills marked by the blue dots there, will be an important part of the Battle of Lookout Mountain itself. And as Union troops attacked beginning on the western side of the mountain and drove the Confederates around the northern tip of the mountain, Confederates were unable to make a stand on the most defensible ground at the northern tip of the mountain because that ground was pummeled by the artillery fire coming from Moccasin Bend. Those guns helped lift the siege of Chattanooga and thereby helped win the course of the war for the Union. Moccasin Bend's role in the Civil War has been less well understood, but the earthworks that survive out there on the Bend, really the largest collection of the earthworks from the Civil War period that survive today, allow us to tell some of that story. And of course, that story can be told from the top of Lookout Mountain, and even from right here. This would not have been a comfortable place in October of 1863. But our story, this continuation of this region as a doorway and gateway, has been what people have found here for now millennia.
Jay, thank you. Let's welcome back Tricia to the podium to kick off the Century of Preservation efforts.
Thank you, Jed. And we can just take a moment to, because I don't know about you, but I feel like I was in History 205. The effort to save the Bend began more than a century ago when Chattanooga Times and New York Times publisher Adolph Ox offered to put up half the cost of preserving Moccasin Bend. While no one took him up on that generous offer, the seed was planted. A Chattanooga Times editorial in the 1940s stated that Moccasin Bend could be as great an asset to Chattanooga as Central Park is for New York City, and many Chattanoogans supported that idea. Mickey Robbins tells a wonderful story of his great aunt Sophia Long making a toast at he and Eloise's engagement party that turned into a speech about protecting Moccasin Bend. So happy, congratulations to the bride and groom, and by the way, save the Bend. So that happened in the late 60s. In 1950, Congressman J.B. Frazier successfully sponsored national park legislation to protect 1,400 acres on Moccasin Bend. However, in 1953, Tennessee Governor Frank Clement refused to allocate the $100,000 necessary to implement the park. Soon after, a series of unfortunate events occurred. We've already seen photos of the dredging of the shoreline that dislocated untold number of culturally sensitive resources and artifacts. And then we had the construction of multiple non-conforming uses across this iconic landscape. The State Mental Health Hospital, of course, has already been mentioned in the far sort of toe of the Bend region. Moccasin Bend also holds a wastewater treatment facility in the foreground, a police firing range. Let me get my firing range on this side of Stringer's Ridge. Those earthworks that Jim Ogden was just talking about are right up here. Wastewater treatment, golf course, hospital. There was a model airplane facility and some radio towers in this middle part. And, you know, of course, the dredging that dumped a lot of, you know, slurry, so really not the greatest word for the sacred soil to be dumped back into the middle of Moccasin Bend, but that's exactly what happened. So, yeah, let me see what's next. I think we're getting up to the more modern history of the Moccasin Bend Task Force. And so I'm going to turn it over to Sally Robinson and Rick Montague to talk about that effort.
Well, here we are again, assembled to stand up for the preservation of Moccasin Bend. Despite National Park Service status, despite the National Historic Landmark designation that Congressman Zach Wamp authored and skillfully had enacted by the U.S. House of Representatives, despite the Chattanooga City Council and the Hamilton County Commission unanimously endorsing and adopting the Tennessee River Park Master Plan 42 years ago. Here we are again. This time, we cannot fail to fulfill the promise that was made decades ago, that if Moccasin Bend was accepted as part of the National Park Service, the non-conforming uses on the bend would be removed as soon as those uses became obsolete. That time is now. I mentioned the Tennessee Riverwalk Master Plan, the blueprint for downtown revitalization and riverfront development, a 20-year, $20 million plan. We are still enacting it. It was published in 1985, formulated over 3 years of public meetings that the Moccasin Bend Task Force organized. The task force was established in 1982. Again, that was 42 years ago, by the city and the county to make a recommendation to them regarding the best use of Moccasin Bend property they jointly owned. Our local economy was suffering, downtown department stores were moving to malls, and economic growth stagnant. The idea of locating an asphalt plant processing over on Moccasin Bend was being discussed. That would be economic growth, a new business opportunity, etc. And besides, the city and the county already owned the land. But the city and the county elected leaders hesitated and instead appointed a 5-member citizens task force to examine the options and make a recommendation to them about the best use for the jointly owned 600 acres on Moccasin Bend. That is how the Moccasin Bend Task Force came to be. Rick Montague was jointly appointed by the city and county. County Executive Dalton Roberts appointed 2 members, and I was one of the 2 he chose for the county. We joined the 2 city-appointed task force members, and we went to work. This historic moment of reunification belongs to the ages. It is implicit in the Tennessee River Park Master Plan that no government will pave over this crossroads on Moccasin Bend that represents the history of the North American continent. Thanks. Well, I'm going to tell you, Rick Montague is now going to tell you the rest of the story.
In the context of which we speak today, this is smaller than a peanut skin, but I'm going to do what I was asked to do, And when Sally asks me to do anything, I will do it. Before I get cranked up, I want to repeat a statement made by Sally the very first night the Moccasin Bin Task Force met. It was at my home. We'd had dinner. I turned to my left and I said to Sally first, "What are your aspirations for Moccasin Bin?" And she said, "We need places that are free from history." Thank you. Thank you. That set the tone for 3.5 years that were to follow. And I'll try not to repeat 3.5 years too often, but that's 3.5 years where we were meeting regularly and we were meeting all over town. We wanted to set a place that would be beautiful. Oh, it's not there. I thought I was loud enough. Okay. All right. That set a tone for 3.5 years to follow. We were out to create beautiful, accessible, inspirational places that would be open and welcoming to all, rich, poor, black, white, city, county, visitors, anyone who wanted to appreciate the Tennessee River from Chickamauga Dam to the gorge. I still prize my 3.5 years with Sally, Bob Mayfield, George Mahoney, and Jack McDonald. It was always inspiring. Their generosity of spirit and adventure made us all love our work. And we worked for free, which was probably what I deserved, but we were volunteers. Our mission was enhanced by the trusting and patient commitments of Mayor Pat Rose and Gene Roberts and County Executive Dalton Roberts and Chair of the Commission Paul McDaniel. No one hesitated to call on any member of the task force at any time. This was not civic duty. It was an exercise in learning being taught by our own citizens, young, old, black, white, rich, poor, and in the middle, at public meetings that were fashioned by Eleanor Cooper, but were participated in by all members of the task force. We went to homes, community centers, churches, housing projects, neighborhood parks. If Dalton called me and said, "Go to Bakewell, Rick," I went. If Gene asked Jack McDonald to go anywhere, he'd do it as a priority. If Commissioner McDaniel wanted to see me over at his church, I waited until he was finished with whatever he was doing. Presented by the governments with the chance to inspire every citizen to imagine our future, the task force teamed with Stroud Watson of the Urban Design Studio to translate the community's dreams into reality. We would hardly have known how to find our way without Stroud. Our professional relationship with Carr Lynch and Associates of Cambridge taught us how to shape a future physically, ethically, patiently, morally, and lovingly. Now we see that the level of trust, patience, pride, and stewardship every day as we move about our city. If you think the Chattanooga that we inhabit today is the same Chattanooga that we inhabited in 1977, you were badly mistaken. It goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. City building takes vision, patience, art, and love. And that was shown when the task force sponsored its final presentation at the Trade Center. The elected officials were up front. The crowd grew and grew and grew and grew. And the walls started to move back and moved and moved and moved until people were standing around the back, and the head count was well over 1,000 people. This was for a public presentation of land plans. Thank you, Eleanor. Allow me, I want to, if you'll indulge me just a little bit more, 2 on-ramps into this experience. First, I happen to be one of 3 trustees on the Lyndhurst Foundation who have been chairman of the Boys and Girls Club, what's now the Boys and Girls Club. And we saw firsthand the pathology of racism, poverty, discrimination, low expectation, and separateness. Our kids are the ones that taught us what community needed to become. And we decided we did not hesitate to try to serve everyone that we could. Last, I want to thank Jack Lupton for challenging the Lyndhurst board to daily come to work to try to make this a better city for everybody. And Jim Bowen, wherever you are, you're a saint. Finally, through the Urban Land Institute and the Planning Commission, we had a timeline that was set by them, but the work plan was set by our hearts and our devotion to this city. And I close by reflecting upon a giant topo map I have on my wall containing quadrants of Chattanooga, Knoxville, Rome, Georgia, and Greenville, South Carolina. It's got Mount Mitchell and Clingman's Dome. But the most distinctive feature, clearly visible 18 feet away on the other side of the room, is a distinctive knot where the Tennessee River bends upon itself between the mountains. Gracefully and distinctively, twin points of Lookout Mountain and Signal on either side. Even the casual observer has an eye that is drawn there. And the question is, why? Surely Mother Nature planted this question eons ago. And man surely has been drawn to this place. Why? 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 With a broad delta below. Why could this possibly be there? We owe it to ourselves to find out at all costs. Can we afford anything less? Surely, somewhere beneath the surface must be something that was a primitive expression of love and community. This is an existential question. We owe it to ourselves and our children to find out, starting now.
Cheers!
And now it is my pleasure to introduce, I'm not going to forget you this time, former Congressman Zach Wamp.
Give me this.
Oh, there's my.
All right, y'all, I'm just going to make a couple of observations. One observation is that Olin and Butch Mill's son, Jay, the archaeologist, have meant a lot to us. And that family's some of the most prominent Democrats in America. And Zach Wamp and his family are here, and we're Republicans. But you know, we really cherish the fact that throughout the history of this country, on big things, we come together. Matters of war and peace, we meet at the water's edge. Matters of preservation and conservation and doing the right thing by our legacy and education, we come together. And we're together here. And it's really, really important that we're very much together here, all of us, with common mind and purpose. And I want to start on that front. I want to thank Ruby Falls for hosting us. I want to thank them for lighting up this building in the wintertime so that I can find joy at Christmas by looking up at Ruby Falls. I didn't even know this room was here when I drove by so many times, but it's good to be here. I also want to say on an observation that I think it was de Tocqueville that talked about a public meeting in the United States being as it manifests the American Republic as well as anything ever has. When people freely come out and gather and discuss matters that they're interested in, that is about as American as it gets. So I want to say we need more of this and not less. And we need more airing out of our differences so that we can come back together in agreement. And stakeholder input and involvement from the community and the people is really, really important. So I just want to talk about the 8 years between 1995 and 2003 when I worked pretty hard with a bunch of people to build consensus in Washington to do the right thing by Moccasin Bend and how we went about that. Now, I know when we went in 1995, most of y'all thought we were a bunch of crazy people. But today, you'd probably rather have us than them. But I've been to all the Vision 2000 meetings. I'd been to the venture meetings because my mom was on the board. I knew what Mr. Lupton and the community's vision was for the future. And young whippersnappers like Bob Corker and I went out to all the meetings to try to figure out where we wanted to be in the year 2000. And I knew that part of it was reclaiming the river and reclaiming our history and making the most out of the future. And so I got really engaged in public places and people and things that came out of that process, and river walks and ways to engage the people that live here, like Weston said, to have pride in where we were that would attract other families to come here for the weekend and see what Chattanooga had to offer. And part of it was Moccasin Bend. And I tell you, when I was a freshman member of Congress and I stood right down here where the state is talking about building another building, with Dr. Dwayne King, who was the foremost authority on the Trail of Tears and the National Trail System. He's dead now, but he came in from New Mexico and he stood right there at that special place and he looked up at Lookout Mountain and he said, for the millennia, people have gravitated to where the mountains and the rivers and the plains meet. And that's why there's 12,000 years of human history underneath our feet. And I was sold completely on the need to preserve that special place. But it's very difficult in Washington to get things done, not because of the dysfunction is there today, but because the federal government does its diligence. The National Park System will not let a freshman member of Congress move legislation through the process until they have determined the national significance, the historical significance. Brad is shaking his head because I went through that whole process through the Resources Committee at the subcommittee level when I introduced legislation to set Moccasin Bend aside. And they said, you have to look at the archaeology. You have to look at the history. You have to prove that this deserves to be added to the National Park System. They had NEPA. They had public scoping meetings. They had all the federal processes. You had to dot your I's and cross your T's. And I persevered through one Congress, then another Congress, then another Congress. I got it through the House. I got Senator Thompson to take it through the Senate. I got President Bush to sign it into law because we did our homework. We did our diligence. They looked at everything. They looked at what the archaeologists just spoke to. They knew what the history was. They knew that all this stuff was under the ground that was so important that if you had an archaeological district, people would come from miles away and children would come in school buses from North Georgia and Northern Alabama because this was an archaeological district. And in the middle of that whole process, they said, Congressman Wamp, we think that this should be the only archaeological district in the entire national park system. So what we think you need to amend your legislation, not to have it as a unit of the national park system, but to have it a subunit of the Chickamauga-Chattanooga National Military Park so that it has its own classification as an archaeological district where you could actually have a dig. And you could actually have the archaeologists come and explain to future generations exactly what is here and who lived here and who came through here and why DeSoto crossed here going to the Mississippi to discover the Mississippi River and all these things. And it was so unique. And so we actually passed it and we signed it into law and we made it the only national archaeological district in the United States. And you say, well, if that's all true, Zach, how in the world is the state moving towards building a new building within feet of where this is? You say, how could that ever happen? The truth is people don't know what they don't know. And I think we all have a shared responsibility because on February the 26th, after helping the Friends for a few months try to encourage the delegation and the state leadership to pivot in a different direction, I went and met with Governor Lee face-to-face, and Deputy Governor Butch Ely face-to-face, and the Commissioner of Tourism face-to-face. And I was discouraged to hear that they knew very little about what I just said. They knew very little about the history of Moccasin Bend. In fact, the Commissioner of Tourism told me that we're a little short on Native American history in our state in terms of our tourist attractions. And I said, you have the only archaeological district in America in Chattanooga. And he did not know that. So whose responsibility is that? Well, it's theirs, but y'all, it's ours too. It's ours too. I mean, we did not do a good enough job explaining to our own delegation what in the world is here and what has happened. And pardon me for my time being up, but I want to finish this story because this is really, really important, that we have an obligation to help them move in a different direction and do the right thing. I was hoping it would happen without that face-to-face meeting, but I can tell you that our friend Governor Lee threw some papers in the air when I met with him and said, how could this be? How could we get this far along on this before I realized that everything you're telling me is the case? He was frustrated. 100% of the people that I've met along this road want a new mental health center. And we're grateful that the state is going to build it. But I've met very few people who think it belongs on Moccasin Bend. It belongs somewhere else. And I'm not the one to recommend where it goes, but it would make more sense that it would be closer to our healthcare facilities over on 3rd Street, somewhere in that healthcare corridor. That makes a lot more sense. And they went through this process looking for land and said they needed 40 acres and looking for 40-acre sites. And then they say, no, we'll just build on a 13-acre site. And we're going to go closer to Hampton Village, where the most historically significant assets on Moccasin Bend are, instead of the building that we have now. So none of that makes sense. None of it makes sense. And oh, by the way, 1 million visitors come to the Chickamauga Chattanooga National Military Park a year. You know what the studies say? The Moccasin Bend National Archeological District will bring in new tourists to Hamilton County every year, 250,000 more, a 25% increase in what currently comes to the Chickamauga Chattanooga National Military Park. As the mayor's representative said, those are dollars for our community. That is added value. That is culture. That is history. That is education. And it's doing the right thing. We got a job. We've got to give them a graceful pivot away from making a tragic mistake, because we deserve for Moccasin Bend to be all that it can be as the only archaeological district in the national park system. The future generations of this community, they cry out for us to make sure the state pivots away from Moccasin Bend. Thank you.
Congressman, thank you. It's just an honor to have you here. Very, very passionate. All right. And now we're getting close to public comment, but we want to welcome our National Park Superintendent, Brad Bennett, and Tricia King Mims. Come back up here.
Well, Tricia told me I had 10 hours, so I'm going to take 10 minutes? 10 minutes, okay, sorry. I want to reintroduce a park historian, Jim Ogden, who's going to tag team with me. I'm going to fast forward through 20 years of National Park Service management, but I want you to remember 3 things among a few things that I will tell you. Number 1, as has just been illustrated, Moccasin Bend would not be in the National Park System without the vision of citizens of this community speaking through their representatives at city, county, state, and federal levels, consulting with tribal nations, working together to make this happen. And as we'll show you, for 20 years, the National Park Service has made great strides in investing in the protection, preservation, interpretation of Moccasin Bend. And thirdly, as was just pointed out by Congressman Walk, if we continue to work together, going back to point 1, we can fully realize the potential of Moccasin Bend. Jim and Jay and others already gave you a good rundown on why this place is so special. I would like to add, in between Cherokee removal in 1838 and the Civil War on Moccasin Bend in 1863, there's another layer of history, which was the antebellum slave trade that used that same federal road. And some of you have heard the story of Jacob Cummings, who was an enslaved man on Moccasin Bend who liberated himself, went north, became a conductor on the Underground Railroad, and now Moccasin Bend in Chickamauga and Chattanooga is a certified site on the Underground Railroad Network to Freedom, among its other accolades. So again, how did this all happen? Well, you saw this picture already. 656 acres were transferred from the state of Tennessee, city of Chattanooga, Hamilton County, to the National Park Service to implement the legislation Congressman Wamp sponsored. You'll note that that was roughly 2/3 of the 956 acre National Historic Landmark that was established in 1986. And it's important for context to know the difference. The National Historic Landmark includes the grounds of the hospital, the law enforcement training range, the golf course. So that is important to know. We've got 2/3 federally protected, but there's 1/3 to go. So what have we been doing in our 20 years? Well, I will let Mr. Ogden go through these points, and then I will pick up afterward.
Through all of this, the development of the Moccasin Bend National Archeological District has been a public process with the National Park Service. Our cooperative management plan initially, that was part of that background homework that Congressman Wamp talked about, that needed to be done. But with the actual establishment of the National Archeological District, we then enter into the larger planning process, and we begin a general management plan for Moccasin Bend, and we include meeting with representatives of the federally recognized tribes that have ties to this area. More than 17 individual nations of Native Americans, and those meetings have taken place right here in Chattanooga. Both on site on Moccasin Bend and at other points, and we have also gone to Oklahoma to be able to seek input from a larger number of people of those nations as well. We have developed a development concept plan for an interpretive center or visitor center at Moccasin Bend. You'll hear a little bit more about the progress on that actual project in a little bit. And we have also reclaimed or recovered the long abandoned road leading down to the Tennessee River at Browns Ferry on Moccasin Bend. Through one of the partner organizations, the Trust for Public Lands, another important piece of property on Moccasin Bend was acquired. That includes the old road leading down to the river, and through a series of studies and archaeological work by Lawrence Alexander and his team, we actually found the trace of the old road leading down to the bend. And that is now the Browns Ferry Road Trail that you can hike anytime you want during daylight hours, and much of that follows the actual historic route down to the bend.
Thank you, Jim. Next slide. And again, these are nationally significant archaeological resources. And as we know, before federal protection, there were folks that were digging up artifacts, selling them on the black market, disturbing burial sites. And so we have law enforcement rangers who regularly patrol on land and by water to make sure no one's up to any nefarious activities. We continue to do government-to-government consultation with our tribal nations. And we've also, in 2014, commissioned a cultural landscape report. This is a document which is available on the park website. If you want to take a deep dive and know all the history of every single corner of Moccasin Bend, excluding the stuff that Jim Ogden didn't get a chance to put in there, that will be the second volume. You will see at the very back of that document this map, which shows the National Historic Landmark boundary in that outline there. And the green areas are the part of the landmark that are currently within the Moccasin Bend National Archeological District. The bright pink areas are those areas where the non-conforming uses are, and we hope someday, with the continued efforts of everyone in this room, to make Moccasin Bend whole. So Jim mentioned the planning to find the proper place to put a visitor center. That was kind of putting the cart before the horse, because usually we start with a general management plan for the entire area, not just the visitor center, but where trails are to go, that type of thing. So soon after my arrival, I launched the general management plan amendment for Moccasin Bend. We did 2 public meetings, received hundreds of public comments. We consulted again with our tribal nations, and the outcome of that, of course, I should note, we of course met with all of our elected officials, briefed them on what our goals were, and through that, in 2017, we finished the plan, and now it's time to implement it. I mentioned preserving Moccasin Bend. Part of the challenge, as Jay pointed out, the rivers move, and rivers do what rivers do. And unfortunately, over time, parts of the archaeological district, including sensitive archaeological resources, have been eroding away into the Tennessee River. So about 10 years ago, the National Park Service started working with the Army Corps of Engineers to armor the shoreline and segment by segment, as funding allows, protect those riverbanks so we continue to protect the archaeological resources. We have also, over the past couple decades, had many hikes by Jim Ogden up to those earthworks, out to the village sites. We have some of our rangers who do educational activities with area school groups, lots of interpretive programs with the general public where we tell all the stories of Moccasin Bend. One of the proudest things we do is partner with the City of Chattanooga, Outdoor Chattanooga, and put rangers on canoes and kayaks, and National Park Partners pays for all the seats, and then folks get to recreate on Moccasin Bend and learn a little history along the way. That's been a fabulous partnership. We've also put up interpretive wayside signs, the informational panels you'll see when you walk the trails. Jim mentioned we essentially doubled the size of our trails. We had the Blue Blazes Trail, which is right there in yellow, one of the 2 public trails you can walk now and learn about the archaeology and the Civil War history. And then the Browns Ferry one he mentioned was added during that time frame. These 2 maps are really important, and for those of you that didn't grab a hard copy, if you want to get one at the back of the room before you leave, we have these maps in a small packet for you. On the left, you'll see pretty much the present situation. The green areas are part of the National Archaeological District where public access is controlled because of the sensitive archaeological resources or safety challenges in reaching them. The yellow areas, as mentioned, are currently open. The right map is what resulted from our public planning. And as soon as the city and county finish moving that firing range, clean up the lead contaminated soil, we will be able to expand a riverfront trail from that purple place in the upper right is where the visitor facilities are being built, and allow folks to walk along the river and up into those hilltops to see those amazing earthworks that are so well preserved. By the way, at the very bottom in white is the state-owned land where the Moccasin Bend Mental Health Institute currently resides. When we were doing public planning, we met multiple times with the state officials that manage the hospital and invited them to comment on our plans. One of the alternatives, some of you might remember, had a riverfront trail wrapping around the hospital grounds, which the National Park Service had a legal right to do. We have an easement along that way. And we heard concerns from the hospital staff that they didn't want the public so close to the patients for security and privacy, which makes one wonder, if you're retreating to a 13-acre site, wouldn't you have more visitors closer to your site? But there you have it. Zeroing in on that purple spot, on that 10 to 11 acre site, we have been planning for years, raising funds for years, thanks to National Park Partners, with contributions from the county, from the city, hundreds of donors. And this will allow folks to safely park off the street, commercial tours, school groups, use the restroom, walk out to the riverfront on a wheelchair accessible trail, and underneath a pavilion, see tribal nations conducting cultural demonstrations and have park rangers provide more of the storytelling. So that brings us to 2024, which is going to be a big, big year for Moccasin Bend. If you haven't already put October 14th on your calendar, get your calendar out right now and make sure you are on the Chattanooga riverfront that day. We will be celebrating the 20th anniversary of the state of Tennessee, Hamilton County, City of Chattanooga, transferring that land to create Moccasin Bend National Archeological District. October 14th happens to be the kickoff day for the Trail of Tears Conference. They move around the country. Last year, they were in Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma. 2 years ago, they gathered with the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians in North Carolina. But this year, they are coming to Chattanooga. Yes, they are. And on that beautiful meadow right there with the southern tip of Stringer's Ridge in the middle ground and Lookout Mountain in the distance, we will be breaking ground on our visitor facility. Congressman Wamp hit these numbers, and so I won't belabor them and repeat them. But again, it's important to remember that folks come to learn and stay. The National Park Service actually did a study showing that 1 million visitors that come to this national park also spend an extra night to come up to Ruby Falls and another night to go to the Tennessee Aquarium. So the economic benefit that a national park draws to the community, 81 million now, another 20 million a year once we fully develop the national park. So again, the 3 things to keep in mind. All of y'all made this happen in the first place, to protect 2/3 of the National Historic Landmark. The National Park Service continues to invest in protecting, preserving, and interpreting this place. And I have complete confidence that everyone in this room will keep working, keep fighting to get the other 1/3 of the National Historic Landmark in the National Archeological District. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brad. The Eastern Band of the Cherokee Nation, it was a very historic moment on April 4th. They passed a tribal council resolution formally opposing the state's proposal to build on Moccasin Bend. As soon as that is in the public record, it still needs to be codified and signed, officially signed by Chief Hicks, but he is the one who read it into the record at tribal council. So that's just a matter of probably a few more days. And then you'll be able to see the entire text of that resolution. Incredibly powerful. And it's a very historic moment. I think Congressman Wamp and many others in the room who have worked with the tribal nations for many years know that they don't usually go out on a big public limb like this to oppose something. Very historic moment, and it's going to go down in the Save the Bend legends that the Eastern Band came forward. And I have to say that would not have happened without Congressman Wamp. Before we get to the public comment, just one more thing. We really hope that you will stay informed, stay involved. If you're not already part of National Park Partners, please visit our website, sign up for the e-blast. We'll be continuing to put out information as our progress continues. Sign and share the petition. There's QR codes on all the tables for you to sign the petition. You can also find a copy of it on our websites. And we hope you will continue to support our efforts to save the Bend again. And now Jed's gonna kick off the public comment.
Hey, and Tricia, this has been an outstanding event tonight. Just a round of applause for you and your staff. You got a great staff. All right, I was told to read this. Please refrain, if you're doing a public comment, from suggesting alternate locations for the non-conforming uses like the firing range or mental hospital, as this is not appropriate forum for those types of questions. It's like the thing that they read real quickly before a car commercial. All right, here we go. Okay, Mickey Robbins.
Well, this is a wonderful, wonderful occasion. And speaking of history, it's amazing how, in a sense, we've dodged the bullet over the years. And Tricia asked me to give a little backlog, I guess you could say, of all the things that have almost happened to the Bend over the years. You may have read that during the 1920s and 1930s, industry pushed hard to put industrial sites out on the Bend. And one of the leaders said, we do not want a nice ladylike park. Well, that continued for a while. One of the most egregious actions was in 1958 when Mayor Rudy Ojadi was getting Chattanooga connected to the freeways. And he advocated a new expressway across the Bend, and that was coupled with a canal up across the more northern part of the Bend. The project involved 2 bridges as well as a dam with a sluice gate across the Tennessee River that would ensure the necessary amount of water going through the canal. Also, earth from digging the canal across the Bend would be used to elevate the lower section that's facing Lookout Mountain, so that land could be elevated and leveled for industrial use. Now, planners stressed that the Bend would not be destroyed because the sluice gate and the dam would regulate the river flow level and protect the Bend from flooding, so the Bend would be just fine. In the late 1950s, on another Bend, Sophia Schultz Long, my great aunt, commissioned what amounted to an equestrian center and a formal garden with a Swan Lake, hiking and bridle trails, athletic fields, a horse show area, polo grounds, a band shell and stage, a swimming pool, and a bathhouse. 10 years later, the ideas kept coming. Chamber of Commerce President Scotty Probasco raised the idea of a junior college on the Bend. And then plans for a UT soil testing station were floated in 1968. That was followed by a proposal for an asphalt plan in the late 1970s. JC's introduced the idea of a zoo in the early 1980s. Then an amphitheater featuring area drama was presented to officials in the early 1990s, but preservationist sentiment had begun to take hold. And along that line, a Cherokee Museum was proposed in 1994 by the Chattanooga Intertribal Association. In 1995, UTC explored the idea of athletic fields on the Bend. And last but not least, I couldn't resist mentioning this one. Turning back the clock to 1912, a Chattanooga Daily Times account noted that the Retail Merchants Association was exploring new marketing approaches and entertained the priceless idea of an immense H.J. Heinz pickle sign on the Bend. That idea was rejected, but what a promoter's dream. Imagine how many visitors at today's Point Park might see the sign and go out and buy a jar of Heinz pickles. So much for intriguing ideas. We can learn from history, and there have been a lot of accidents of history. And it's amazing that we've come where we are tonight. And it's a wonderful, wonderful, we hope, culmination of things. But we try to avoid the mistakes of history and do the right thing. And today, that's getting stakeholders together to transparently develop a Chattanooga Way consensus, avoid inappropriate schemes, move the firing range and hospital off the Bend, and support a great national archaeological district.
And Mickey, it has been such a pleasure getting to know you all these months, and thank you for your articles of history that you do so many Sundays. We do appreciate it. And it's an honor to call on our former mayor, Ron Littlefield.
Just a couple of comments that about discouragements of the past. There was a time when the aquarium was first proposed. It was to be a small affair, you know, $5-7 million. And as it grew, the opposition grew. And people say, well, you have a lot of opposition today. Well, you should have been there. Some of you were there and saw the opposition that we dealt with, including members of the legislature who made fun of the idea and were not for it until it happened. And then, of course, as always happens, they showed up to take credit for it. And in that regard, the Walnut Street Bridge, I don't mean to be negative, but the state then was adamantly opposed to saving the Walnut Street Bridge. They claimed it was a hazard to navigation, that it could fall under its own weight. And so we didn't listen. We hired our own engineers. They looked at it, said it's really in pretty good shape. Really just ought to fix it and make it a pedestrian way. Well, I was a planner at the time, and I thought, I think it should be saved, but I didn't really think it would have the effect that it's had since then. It's been great. But it was adamantly opposed by the state. So sometime after that, I was visiting the Commissioner of Transportation in Nashville, and there was a picture hanging in the lobby of the Commissioner's office, outside his office, of the Walnut Street Bridge. And I went on a large picture, and it had this emblem in the middle, this seal in the middle. And I went up and read it, and it was recognizing the state for their foresight in saving the Walnut Street Bridge.
Sure.
I wanted to recognize the next speaker who's coming up. This is Major McCullough, and it's because of him that we know about a lot of the Bend. His cultural research, archaeologist at the University of the South, and worked at TVA as well, and the cultural the Chattanooga Regional Anthropological Association that he founded. He led the excavations out there at Hampton Place and demonstrated that the looting had not degraded that site. It was extremely important, national significance, and that carried the National Historic Landmark that is the basis for the formation of the park.
Thank you. And I wrote the National Historic Landmark application, by the way, but there's an issue here that you all need to understand because in this case, what we're talking about today is an issue that the public, and only the public, is going to be able to solve. This project of the state to build a new hospital on Moccasin Bend, which when the park becomes what it should be, the entire bend, the entire national landmark at least, when that happens, this hospital will be right in the center of a national park. Now, the federal legislation, the Federal National Historic Preservation Act, is what allows us to protect any historic resources in America. And it states, it covers every federal project, but it has a special section which says special requirements for protecting national historic landmarks, which this proposed hospital site is in, an existing National Historic Landmark that has been in place since 1986. It says, statutory requirement. Section 110 of the Act requires that the agency official proposing any project undertake such planning and action as may be necessary to minimize harm to any National Historic Landmark that may be directly and adversely affected by the undertaking. In other words, the hospital project. Commenting on such undertakings, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation will use the process set forth to make sure that no adverse effect happens. The problem in this case is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the CARES Act federal funding that is to pay for this $265 million hospital building, unfortunately has exempted these projects from this law. In other words, we have no legal protection that we would have anywhere in America, much less inside a National Historic Landmark, much less adjacent to a national park presently, and ultimately in the center of a national park. We have no legal protection, and the state can bull ahead with this project with impunity. Now that is absolutely a travesty, ridiculous. It can't happen. The public has got to make sure this does not happen. Of all places, this is a place where people are going to have to stand in front of bulldozers if this continues to be pursued. That's
Professor, thank you very much.
I didn't hear until the last speaker a key word, which was legal. And if we lived in Florida or California, a project of this magnitude would be inside and outside of every kind of court you can think of. So I know somebody, either Mickey Robbins or somebody as a state official, has looked at the legal concerns. Everything I heard tonight is just rife with legal problems and concern, everything from contractual to federal regulations. And I just have the question, who has said the state can do what it wants to do in the way in which it is presently planning to do? And why is this not a legal problem that ought to be addressed through the courts?
the legal issue is the core here, as I said. And this just absolutely cannot happen. I talked to the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation yesterday about whether, in fact, Zach, federal law is totally exempted in protection under these CARES Act projects. Which federal agency is passing through the money to the state? Where is the state historic preservation officer who should be our Tennessee representative on historic preservation? Is federal law completely exempt under these grants? Does anybody know for certain?
We've heard this thing, not entirely.
Here, come on up.
Well, they're going to investigate it now. They're going to investigate it now and see who's.
Introduce.
Hi, I'm Sam Robinson, and I am also an attorney, retired, but I still have some of that stuff in my head, won't go away. I've given some thought to that, not just because we're here, but I'm talking to Sally all the time about, how this is coming about. In my untrained view, the Indian nations probably have the clearest right of action in this case. That's what I would think.
Under what statute? Though,
Well,
Sam?
I can't quote the statute, but I can tell you that anytime you want to build something that impairs burial grounds, their cultural stuff, just a second if I may finish. The other issue that might come about that somebody else will have to answer is standing to sue. I don't know who it is who would be authorized to make a suit on something like this. I have the feeling that some ordinary citizen may not have standing to sue. It has to be somebody who is harmed by it, mainly. But I think the Indians probably have a lot of standing to sue. And now I'll give it back to Major.
Thank you. Well, they do, except that the state is undertaking the kind of archaeological testing that is ordinarily done under the National Historic Preservation Act. And when that's done, they're going to claim that that 13 acres in and of itself and what it contains is not of national level significance. And therefore, without any protections of the federal law and having shown that there's whatever there is, now it's adjacent to Hampton Place, the most important site probably on the Bend, but we don't know yet what is on that 13 acres per se, because we couldn't test everything years ago, 40 years ago. But they'll present that evidence. The thing is, though, that the National Historic Landmark is not spots. It's not Civil War gun emplacements, a historic Native American village that the first Spanish conquistadors here may have contacted. All of the other dozens of sites, hundreds of sites probably, but the National Historic Landmark is 956 acres of land. Every single stinking acre in that 956 acres is a National Historic Landmark. We fought that battle many times. When we filed the National Historic Landmark nomination, the chief historian of the Park Service at the time, tell me his name. Ed Bars, a highly respected historian, especially in the Civil War period, for the Civil War period. He looked at that National Historic Landmark nomination and he said, I think it's wonderful, except I don't think maybe the Civil War features rise to the level of national significance, so you better cut that out. and we fought it and we won it. Moccasin Bend National Historic Landmark and ultimately National Park is its entirety, every square foot of it, every acre. It's not a series of spots. It would have been gone long ago. The state tried to parse it that way so that the city and county or whoever, the Moccasin Bend Task Force could develop it piecemeal by piecemeal. But we insisted that the entirety of all of this in one single place inside the city limits of a major American city was not duplicated anywhere else in the country, maybe the world. And so that 13 acres is National Historic Landmark. That's been fought over, and that's old fought over ground. And Sam, I agree, probably the Native Americans,
Yeah, we got an answer for you.
Native American interest is most important
My name is John Jones. I'm an attorney licensed only in Oklahoma.
Who is not an attorney?
I think that I'm surprised we haven't heard about the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. It probably would come into play here. Those of you that are involved in legal work may want to look into that aspect to find standing and application.
Oh.
What is that again?
Go ahead.
Hold the
Closer
mic
to the mic.
Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. It's known as NAPGA.
No.
It's very famous among those who are interested in Native American, particularly with museums. If there's any federal funding for a project, it comes into play.
So what particular part of that would we pursue to protect Moccasin Bend?
Would have to look at the act and do some legal research. But I think in general, macro application would be appropriate.
If I could just make a point of clarification on two things. One, we should demand that this phase 1 archaeological study from the state of Tennessee goes far enough to determine what's actually there. Sometimes a phase 1, and you archaeologists can explain this, is only a scraping of the first 18 inches of the surface. And if the phase 1 is done by the state and it doesn't go deeper to understand what the history is under there, that will be the travesty, is if they just use this as an excuse to plow forward. So in full transparency, we have to go far enough with the archaeological studies. Now, the commissioner indicated to Mayor Wamp when she called that she is going to be transparent and open with all this. Give her the benefit of the doubt, but we really do need to know. And then the second thing I would say from my conversations with the tribes, and I can't speak for them, but I've talked to the Cherokee Nation and the Eastern Band many times through the last several months. I'm not sure they were properly consulted by the state about what they're doing, and I know that's a federal law.
But that's part of the National Historic Preservation Act, which is completely out to lunch if the state doesn't have to comply with it at all. And NAGPRA won't help unless graves are actually found on that 13 acres. And I know it pretty well, and those are probably adjacent agricultural fields where the people of Hampton Place regularly planted their crops. I stand to be corrected.
All right. Let's get Jennifer.
Yes. Hello, my name is Jennifer Crutchfield, and I'm a mom. I'm other things too, but I start and end as a mom. And there's somebody who's not in this room. Well, actually, one of them is our kids. Our kids at National Park Partners. Oh, that's a big light. At National Park Partners, we have been using funds from the Open Outdoors program from the National Park Foundation to teach our kids in this county and in surrounding counties about how our local landmarks represent all of the important time periods in American history. And Moccasin Bend is, gosh darn it, at the very heart of it. And there are adolescent children who have told me as we've been doing these lessons since the summer, hey, wait a minute, Miss Jennifer. You mean Moccasin Bend is in danger again? Doesn't this feel a lot like the Trail of Tears? Doesn't this feel a lot like when President Andrew Jackson told the Supreme Court, you said something, enforce it. I'm just a mom. But when kids tell me something powerful like that, and it's not a part of the adult conversation in our Nashville discussions, it seems kind of like we might not be listening to the people who are our future. And if we're trying to preserve our past, gosh darn it, let's respect the people who are in charge of our future. And that's what I gotta say.
And probably one of the best things about working at talk radio is having Jennifer as a colleague. Thank you, Jennifer. Introduce your name.
Hi, I'm Helen Burrell Miles, and I don't want to preach to the crowd because I think everybody in here agrees that we need to stop this, okay? But my question is that I found this, that in a letter to the State Building Commission from July of 2023, the Hamilton County Legislative delegation consisting of Hamilton County state senators, state representatives, which there are 5, state senators, which there are 2, unanimously endorsed a proposed on-site redevelopment plan that includes a 13-acre facility within the 90-acre area. I have written letters. They're not coming. They're not holding town halls if I don't donate to their cause, and no disrespect to any politician in the room, but just because I didn't help to elect you into office does not mean you don't represent me, because you do, whether I'm Republican or Democrat. And I have written, I can't tell you how many letters to our state legislature and our national. Chuck Fleischman, everybody. And they just say, thank you for writing to us. We appreciate it. We're doing the best that we can. We need to get these people here. How do we do that? What do we do? What's our next step? How do we get them to listen to us?
We got one more comment, then we're going to end right on time.
I'm Garnet Chapin, and I helped Ron and some of the others restore the Walnut Street Bridge. But first of all, we stopped the city from tearing it down. And we used the Section 106 review, which requires any federally funded project to go through a Section 106 process. Now, Major has pointed out that due to some COVID legislation that they've exempted it. Well, those people are all elected and re-elected. And where's Chuck Fleischman? I guess he's up there trying to find aid for Israel. But there is a possibility of affecting those people. We can go to the Advisory Council for Historic Preservation, who can lean on our Chief Historic Preservation Officer up in Nashville, and let them know that we want to change the federal law, which exempts it, and let Chuck know that this is important to us, and we're all voters, and let the governor know that we're voters, and use the Section 106 review, which is created for this very purpose. We used it to stop the city from tearing down the bridge. I can remember very well going to see Pat Rose, who was the mayor at the time, and it was just me and Pat, and he walked in there and he said, "Garnet, I know what you're here for. You love that old bridge, but we just gotta tear it down. We don't have the money to save it, and this is what we've got to do. The bridge is falling down." I said, "Well, Mr. Mayor, There is the Section 106 review, which we have just written and invoked. You're not going to be able to use the federal funds to tear that bridge down. He said, oh shit, Garnet, what did you do? I said, well, Mr. Mayor, you're going to be getting some calls here from the press pretty soon, because we've already announced to them that we are invoking the Section 106 review. And he said, well, what do you expect me to say? I said, well, suggest it's a pedestrian bridge. And fortunately, we were able to find the funds. We were able to come up with a novel engineering plan that saved, instead of a $12.5 million project, it was a $4.5 million project. And we used some creative influence on the people that make these decisions. These guys who are politicians come up every 2 years, not only the federal folks, but the state folks. The states can be involved. Where's Todd Gardenhire? Where are the rest of the political class?
Some of them are trying to change the airport's name to Trump.
Well, let's don't go there.
You asked.
Ah, yes.
Let's go, Grant.
We've got the county representative. I think we ought to get a group together, go to see the head of the Historic Preservation Council up in Nashville, go to Washington, see the head of the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. We have to go to see the head of the National Park Service, or the director of, or the Secretary of the Interior. Somewhat familiar with that, having been the special assistant to the secretary, and convinced them to go private to raise the money for the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island. We raised $250 million off budget to restore the statue in Ellis Island. We're all community activists here now. We need to come up with a strategy in concert with the Park Service, and go talk to those people and let them know that we're voters as well as advocates, and change some minds.
I want to follow up just very briefly on a couple of those comments. Garnet, Secretary Holland, Secretary of the Interior Deb Holland, was here at Moccasin Bend in October and walked the Trail of Tears route and has been fully briefed on the entire situation, as has the National Park Service Director, Chuck Sams. So they are aware in Washington at that level anyway. And then I also wanted to point out, well, first of all, stand up, Meg, Lana, Becky, Larry, everyone who's been part of the National Park Partners, Friends of Moccasin Bend, or Friends of Chickamauga and Chattanooga board. Please stand up. Thank you all so much for this legacy of service that I've kind of inherited. And, you know, I always think about this quote of standing on the shoulders of giants, and I definitely feel that way about the former Friends of Moccasin Bend Director, Shelley Andrews, who really worked tirelessly with Congressman Wamp and many of you in the room to preserve what we could when we could, and now it's up to us to carry on that legacy. Last but not least, I will say that all of the local Hamilton County delegation, to Ms. Miles' point about trying to have some dialogue, were invited to this meeting. We did hear from Commissioner Williams, Marie Williams, the Commissioner for Mental Health and Substance Abuse, who called me personally on Monday and said that they were planning to have public input at the time that the survey is complete, and that they promised full transparency on that. But I think we've all heard, and you know, to Major McCullough's point, there's you can't cherry pick. It's a National Historic Landmark. There should be absolutely no new construction of modern non-conforming uses within the National Historic Landmark boundary, period, full stop. And that's what we're fighting for, and we're glad you're on with us on the fight. And is there anything I left out? Oh,
Let me say one more thing. The president is up for reelection. I think Joe Biden ought to be invited to come down here and look around.
I'll get right on that.
I'll get right on that.
You please do. Yeah. But I think the next steps are please stay in touch with us. Sign up for the e-blast. We're going to follow up with everybody. We've got your emails from registering. We'll send you some next steps, but be sure to talk about Moccasin Bend, help spread the word, help share the petition, and thank you, Jen. Thank you, Jen Meston, our MC. Thank you to all of our amazing speakers and panelists. And let's save the bend again.
Great job. Beautiful job. Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jan.
I love you, buddy. I love you.
You've been so helpful. You've been fantastic. Good.